That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to do this a little bit different. We're not going to be talking about individual players here. Instead, I'm going to be diving in depth on how I think we need to be changing our approach and our roster construction in particular to gear from the regular season to the fantasy football playoffs. Because I'll say, at this point, you should be in the playoffs. I think that the playoffs this year for a 12-team league should clearly, in my opinion, be weeks 15, 16, and 17. Please, please, please make sure you are not playing anything in week 18 because you're going to have a lot of players sitting. I mean, the last thing that you want is for you to go through and say have a stud on a bad NFL team like DeAndre Swift, and the last week there they go, you know what, we're going to bench DeAndre Swift. There's no reason to play him. And you're like, okay, well, I just lost my running back too for no reason in the championship game. No, please don't have that as your situation. Of course, it's going to be a little too late to change it. Maybe you have to do that just next year. But of course, before we get into it, make sure you go down there, drop that like on the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to, you can also decide to support the channel by going over to Underdog Fantasy. And when you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FLOCK, they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. They have drafts you can get in over there. I mean, they're going to be available in pretty much every single state. Thomas, can you throw up that little screenshot we have of the states that those drafts are not available in? They also have Pick'em contest. I mean, they have so much stuff going on Underdog Fantasy. I think that should be it. Actually, we got to give away some free Fantasy Vlog Network hats. Let's give those out to Dominic and Saeed real quick. Thank you all so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. And let's go through, and there are going to be 4 big check marks that we need to be having. And I'm actually going to dive into some defenses at the end of the video that I think we should be going out there and we should be looking to roster. But first thing is, let's just discuss our strategy at the quarterback position. So y'all know, I mean, I am of the opinion all season that at quarterback, at tight end, at defense, at kicker, really, those are going to be the onesie positions because there's only one spot in the starting lineup for those players compared to the ability to play 3 running backs on a given week or 3 wide receivers. We should naturally be going through and only trying to roster 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 1 kicker, and 1 DST. Well, it's going to be a little bit of a different scenario now. Because the reason that during the regular season, I want us to go through and roster as many running backs on the bench, as many wide receivers on the bench. I mean, there are a multitude of reasons. You need to be rostering as many of those players on the bench to account for bye weeks, to account for injuries, and most importantly, because you're never going to find, say, a defense down there off the waiver wire that you pick up, you roster 2 defenses on your bench, or you roster 2 quarterbacks, then all of a sudden you go, hell yes, we just got this league-winning pickup. I mean, now this player is worth triple what he was just a week ago. We can go through and we can look to sell high on him. That's not going to be possible. At running back, we get one of those guys every single year. You want to be the person going out there and trying to find the next Elijah Mitchell. So during the regular season, it's not a good idea to waste too many bench spots down there on those backup quarterbacks, defenses, kickers, tight ends, however you want to cut that. But now it's a little bit of a different scenario because now we've already identified really those league winning players. You've already gone through and picked up those guys from the waiver wire that are going to be making the impact now, like Elijah Mitchell. But for those players to make a breakout in week 15, like what are the odds? Of course, you could have it where, say, Nick Chubb goes on the COVID list this week. Then all of a sudden, Dearness Johnson is that league-winning running back. Of course, that's going to be possible. And kind of rooting it for it if you pick up Dearness Johnson. But just for a player to all of a sudden fully break out, going to be very, very rare. Now, with that being said, going over to the quarterback position, still, if you have a player like Kyler Murray, if you have a player like Tom Brady, if you have a player like Patrick Mahomes, there you don't necessarily need to roster 2 guys. You're still only going to be rostering 1. But say instead you're rostering someone like Taysom Hill, who has been giving you elite quarterback 1 production while he's been playing. But in that instance, it's probably a good idea to go through and roster multiple guys because we need to make sure our starting lineup is optimal. We need to make sure that we don't really worry about the depth as much as just getting those best players based on matchup into our starting lineup. And speaking on the fact that depth doesn't matter as much, the reason for that now that we're in the fantasy football playoffs is, multivariable as well. Because A, we're already through all the bye weeks. B, a lot of these players, you already know who's injured. You already know who you're getting back. The uncertainty is almost out the window now. I mean, going through and making our top 24 running back rankings, going through and making our top 30 wide receiver rankings, the options that we have to do so with, I mean, they're a lot better. It's a lot easier to make those rankings because we already kind of know what's going on, rather than back in week 4. It's so much is moving so quickly. Roles are changing. Like, you don't have to worry about that now. And another reason why you don't have to worry about your depth as much is, say all of a sudden Nick Chubb goes on the COVID list, and now we're having to go and we're having to run to the waiver wire as fast as possible to pick up Dearness Johnson. Well, usually you're used to having to go up against 11 other owners when you run to the waiver wire and you're really battling it out there. Whereas now, I mean, the amount of pressure that teams are going to be faced to look to the waiver wire, all those bad teams at the very bottom of the league that are going through and are desperate for the Dearness Johnson type player, they're out of it now. Now they're no longer looking at the waiver wire. They're probably not opening their fantasy football app at all. Maybe they haven't been doing so for a couple weeks now. So we're not having to worry about the competition to pick up that player, because out of the 4-6 teams that are left in the playoffs, I mean, how many of those teams need a player like Dearness Johnson? How many of those teams instead are rolling out Dalvin Cook and Najee Harris every single week regardless? So there's going to be less competition to pick up those players off the waiver wire, and there are going to be less players coming off the waiver wire that can make that league-winning difference at the end of the season. So let's roster another quarterback so we can play the matchups. Let's roster another defense so we can play the matchups. And also, speaking of just going through and having our roster construction a little bit different, just in case you have not had your trade deadline yet, go through, trade those depth pieces away. Go trade any player that you have away on the bench to get the most marginal of upgrades in the starting lineup. We're going to be very brief on this because I'd imagine that 9 out of 10 people watching this video, you've already had your trade deadline pass here. Now, I think that you should really be able to trade all the way up until Thursday. That's just me. That's how I run my own leagues nonetheless. And let's go through a couple other things before we dive into the defenses that I think that you need to be picking up and rostering down there on your bench for the fantasy football playoffs. And one thing that we really need to be watching out for at this time of the year is, think about it. We are now in mid-December. You know that whenever we are going through and we're answering start-sit questions back in week 7, weather is something that I never talk about. Weather, I think, is something that a lot of people focus in on, and it's because they have nothing better to talk about. They don't really know what's important to look out for, so they're going through and going, yeah, winds are up to 18 miles per hour. There's going to be a drizzle in Cincinnati. Let's go through and avoid it. It doesn't really matter. Well, now it actually does. We're getting to the time of the year, really we've been in the time of the year the past 3 or 4 weeks at this point, that you're really going to have to make sure you're checking out those weather reports, because submitting that starting lineup is going to be so damn important. Making sure that we're avoiding situations that we had, say, with the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots a few Monday nights ago, where Mac Jones goes out there and he throws the ball 3 times. So not only are we going to have to make sure we're avoiding those situations with the wide receivers, with the running backs, with the quarterbacks in the starting lineup, but also at this time of the year, I'm going to be a lot more inclined to go through and roster kickers that are playing in domes. This is something that we talk about a lot, but I mean, to go through and look at the perfect example, I know everybody, and let me give a quick warning here. I play in almost every fantasy football league imaginable. Like, I'm in a 16-team dynasty super flex. I mean, Devy. So we're rostering college players that you have to go through. You have to start 2 quarterbacks. It's a tight end premium. It's a tiered PPR. It's a points per carry. I got play in so many different league formats. The one thing that I don't do anymore, because, I mean, in my opinion, there wasn't much strategy behind it. It wasn't a lot to really talk about at all. It's just a little more random than anything, is I don't play in leagues with kickers. But if you do play in leagues with kickers, you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to go through, try to get those guys in the dome. A perfect example, Tyler Bass. I mean, obviously, this is someone that people have been loving so far this season, and he's been crushing it. I'm going to be a little bit more concerned, say, about him kicking for Buffalo than you would, say, I don't even know who the kicker is, but whoever's going to be kicking for the Indianapolis Colts, whoever's going to be kicking for the New Orleans Saints. So that's one other thing that we need to be on the lookout for. And the last thing, as we've already referenced multiple times, is make sure that you go through and you're willing to use the extra roster spot on that defense, on your bench, so we can have the best option every single week in that starting lineup. Now, to go through and to look at some great schedules for these defenses for the fantasy football playoffs, keep in mind, I am looking at weeks 15, 16, and 17 here. I mean, the Bucs, they really stand out. The sad thing is about the Bucs, as obviously they're going to be rostered in 100% of leagues. Every single person should have the Bucs roster, but nonetheless, they go up against the Saints, the Panthers, the Jets. I want to give them a shout out, but we can go through and we can look at some defenses that may not be rostered in every single league. And what we can do is we can go and try to piece them together, find a couple good weeks from this defense. Then, say the next one has just a good championship matchup. Well, that would be nice. And we compare them with a team that has a good matchup in 15 and 16. So, some teams that stand out that may not be owned in every league, the Seattle Seahawks actually have a very strong schedule where, yes, in week 15, this week right now, you're not going to be able to go out there and play the Seattle DST, but in weeks 16 and 17, they'll be going up against the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions. So those will be some of the best matchups that you'll be able to find. And all we have to do is go through and try to find that one option for this week. So if you are able to go pick up the Seattle Seahawks defense from the waiver wire and we're able to go and find a defense that has a decent matchup in week 15 alone, that's a natural pairing that you can go through and you can take advantage of. And to go and speak on some of those defenses that are going to be decent in week 15, another team that really stands out, the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins defense has been surging later on in the year, not going to be available in every league. They have a decent schedule on their own right, going up against the Jets, the New Orleans Saints, and Tennessee. But say if we're able to go through and we're able to combine the Seattle Seahawks defense as well as the Miami Dolphins, you get to play Miami against the Jets in week 15. Then you get to play Seattle against the Bears in week 16 and Seattle against the Lions in week 17. So you're expecting that you get that elite production from your defense every single week during the fantasy football playoffs. Some other notable names that have really good week 15 matchups are going to be someone like the Dallas Cowboys, where obviously the Cowboys, they generate a lot of turnovers. So I'd imagine that they're rostered in the majority of leagues at this point. But nonetheless, if you were able to pick them up, they're going to be going up against the New York Giants. Another team would be the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles defense, I'd imagine that you can go through, you can pick them up. And looking at that Eagles schedule, you'll be able to play them multiple weeks. Let me pull up the spread that we actually have on this game for week 15 here with Philadelphia, because this is going to be an interesting spot where not only, has Taylor Heineke looked pretty damn bad, but at the same time, if they're without Terry McLaurin this week, they're without both Terry McLaurin as well as Logan Thomas, I'd imagine it's pretty damn hard for the Washington football team to be able to move the ball down the field. And yeah, right now, Philadelphia is going to be favored by about 5 points. So that'd be a nice defense to be able to go through and pick up. They get, right now, Washington. Next week, they get New York as well. And then the week after, they get they get Washington yet again. So, maybe you go pick up Philadelphia just for this 3-week playoff stretch, because obviously the New York Giants are failing right now. That's one of the best offenses that you can go up against. There's some other notable names that have good matchups, but I don't necessarily want to tell you to run out there and pick up. You got Buffalo going up against Carolina this week, but obviously Buffalo is going to be rostered in every single league. And I will say, if you are desperate, say you cannot find a single team off the waiver wire that has a good schedule, you could go get the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, obviously, the Jags are a horrible team, but they're going up against a couple other horrible teams. They're going up against the Texans and the Jets over the next 2 weeks. Maybe you talk yourself into that. I probably would not. But, I know everybody else is in their own situation here. And one last thing that I want to talk about before we move on from the defenses is just being a little wary of the players that are on offenses that have nothing going on. I think if you're going over and looking at standings right now for the NFL, there are some clear teams that have no incentive to keep on going out there and playing their young guns. Looking at the New York Jets, the perfect example. Elijah Moore, I bet you right now, Elijah Moore could play if he wanted to. Of course, I am a nobody. I am just some kid sitting in his basement, essentially. Obviously a metaphor, but nonetheless, with Elijah Moore, This is a team that the New York Jets have nothing to play for. Right now, they're 3-10. Why would they go out there and why would they even risk it playing Elijah Moore? I mean, another team that fits this mold is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars with James Robinson. James Robinson dealing with a couple lagging injuries. I still think Robinson's okay because, I mean, Urban Meyer is going to be, I don't want to say fighting for his job. He's already fired. He's already fired, essentially. But nonetheless, I mean, they're going to try to prove something here. You got the Giants as well. I mean, maybe they just go through and shut down Daniel Jones and collapse this entire offense. I mean, you have the Lions, as we've discussed, shutting down DeAndre Swift. I mean, you have the Bears as well, 4-9. I'm not speculating this is going to happen, but I'm just saying it's in the range of outcomes. What happens if David Montgomery just steps on his ankle the wrong way? And all of a sudden, I mean, they're like, okay, can we rush David Montgomery, get him back this week? Or should we just throw him on the IR, knowing that he's on a rookie contract? We have him under the deal next year. We already know who David Montgomery is. Like, these are the kind of things that I'm going to begin to think about. You have Carolina losing 3 weeks in a row, falling to 5-8, really not looking to start anybody in Carolina anyway. So I would be a little more concerned about taking those players that are at the very bottom of the standings. Now, what's nice is because only one team gets the playoff bye now in the NFL, you're actually not going to see the teams at the very top, a team like the Arizona Cardinals, a team like the Green Bay Packers, a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going so far ahead of the rest of the field that they're going through and they're taking the foot off the gas, I mean, in your fantasy football championship. That's something that you had to worry about in years past with a team like the Kansas City Chiefs when they would already have the bye locked up 2 weeks beforehand, but now you're not going to have to worry about that, just considering the fact that there's only one team that gets that bye, and every single game in the NFL now is so damn important. But yeah, I think that's all I got for y'all. Please let me know what y'all thought of this video. Please go to the comment section. Let anybody else know the playoff strategies that you may have to help someone, I mean, in the flock, go out there and take home this championship. But thank y'all again for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. Make sure you go down there, drop that like, subscribe to the channel. Go check out Underdog Fantasy, hop in a draft that they have going on over there. I hope to see you out with the live stream sometime tomorrow, tonight. I don't know when we're streaming. I hope y'all have a great day as well.